My name is Emily. I am 35 years old. Until a few hours ago, I believed my life was perfectly ordinary and secure. I am a woman who appreciates quiet routines and stability. I live in a beautiful modern home in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta. I have been married to Andre for 5 years. He is a charming, fast-talking tech sales director who always knows exactly what to say to make people smile and win them over. My family, however, has always considered me the ultimate disappointment. They view me as a plain, uninspired bookkeeper who lacks the glamour, beauty, and ambition required to truly shine in Atlanta's elite African American social circles. Little did they know I was about to execute the most ruthless financial revenge my family had ever witnessed. Before I reveal how I systematically dismantled their perfect facade, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally decided to fight back. I stood perfectly still in my immaculate kitchen, the phone still pressed tightly to my ear. Uncle Vernon's words echoed in my mind, drowning out the gentle hum of the refrigerator. He owned a fleet of luxury yachts down in Miami, Florida. He had just seen my husband, the man who claimed he had a severe migraine, and was resting in our master bedroom, sipping champagne on the upper deck of a yacht with my younger sister, Vanessa. Before I could even process the magnitude of the betrayal, the heavy oak front door of my house slammed open with a deafening crash. I spun around, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I fully expected to see Andre trying to sneak back in, having somehow fabricated a miraculous recovery from his supposed illness. Instead, standing in my foyer was Connor. Connor is my 34-year-old brother-in-law. He is a white man hailing from a prominent legacy real estate family in Georgia. He married my sister Vanessa 3 years ago in a lavish, over-the-top ceremony that my parents treated like a royal coronation. Usually Connor was the epitome of Southern charm, always polished, always wearing a calm, polite smile. Right now, he looked like a man on the brink of absolute violence. His face was flushed crimson. Sweat dripped down his forehead, soaking the collar of his expensive designer polo shirt. He was breathing heavily, clutching an iPad so tightly his knuckles were completely white. "Where is he?" Connor demanded, his voice shaking with uncontrolled rage. He stormed down the hallway, not bothering to wipe his muddy shoes on the pristine rug I had just bought. "Where is your cheating husband?" I stood frozen behind the marble kitchen island. "Connor, what are you talking about?" I asked, though a cold, sickening dread was already spreading through my veins. "Do not play dumb with me, Emily." Connor stepped forward. He hurled the iPad onto the kitchen counter. His arms swung wide, catching the edge of my imported crystal vase. The vase crashed onto the hardwood floor, shattering into hundreds of glittering pieces. The loud noise rang through the empty house, but I did not flinch. I just looked from the broken glass to his furious, desperate eyes. "You knew about this," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You have been covering for them. You sit here playing the quiet, boring accountant, while your husband and my wife make absolute fools of us both." She told me she was going on an exclusive brand trip to Miami for her influencer career. She said Andre was simply helping her negotiate a corporate sponsorship contract because he knows the tech industry. But look at this. He jabbed his finger at the screen of the iPad. It displayed a highly detailed GPS tracking map. A blinking red dot was positioned right over a private luxury marina in Miami. It was the exact dock where Uncle Vernon parked his most exclusive cruise ships. Vanessa just withdrew $500,000 from my family's joint trust account. Connor's voice cracked, revealing the deep, agonizing pain beneath his anger. $500,000, Emily, gone in a single wire transfer. I checked her location through our shared family security app. She is in Florida, and your husband's car is sitting in the long-term parking lot at the Atlanta airport. Tell me the truth. Connor stared at me, waiting for me to break down. He expected tears. He expected me to collapse onto the floor, screaming and crying over the destruction of my marriage. He thought I was just a fragile, naive woman who had been completely blindsided by her glamorous sister. But I did not shed a single tear. The betrayal cut incredibly deep, slicing right through my heart, but the initial shock rapidly transformed into a cold, calculated, and terrifying clarity. I am not covering for anyone, Connor, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. I just got off the phone with my Uncle Vernon. He called to tell me they are on his yacht right now. But if you want to know exactly what happened under this roof today, you are about to see it with your own eyes. I reached across the counter and opened my laptop. What Connor and my entire status-obsessed family did not know was that I was not a lowly, uninspired bookkeeper. I am a highly trained forensic accountant. I am the sole owner and founder of Apex, an auditing firm worth tens of millions of dollars that handles high-level corporate fraud and complex asset tracing. My entire career is built on finding the dirty secrets that wealthy people try to hide. Naturally, my own home was equipped with military-grade hidden smart cameras that Andre knew absolutely nothing about. I typed in my complex encryption password and pulled up the security network dashboard. I navigated to the living room camera and pulled up the footage from exactly 3 hours ago. Connor stepped closer, his anger shifting into tense, breathless confusion. "Look at the screen," I instructed quietly. The video played in crisp high definition. It showed my elegant living room. Andre walked into the frame. He was not wearing the sweatpants he had on this morning when he fake coughed and said he needed to sleep off a fever. He was dressed in tailored linen vacation clothes, looking perfectly healthy, tanned, and excited. A moment later, Vanessa walked into the frame. She dropped her designer travel bag onto my custom sofa. Andre smiled, grabbed her by the waist, and kissed her passionately. Right in my house. Right on my furniture. Connor let out a sharp, ragged breath. He gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard the stone could have cracked. We stood side by side in silence, watching his wife enthusiastically betray him with my husband. But the kissing was not the detail that made my blood run entirely cold. I pressed the spacebar to pause the video, then zoomed in on Vanessa's neck. "Do you see what she is putting on?" I asked, pointing directly at the screen. Connor squinted, leaning closer to the glowing display. "It is a diamond necklace." "Not just any diamond necklace," I replied, a bitter metallic taste filling my mouth. "That is a vintage custom-cut diamond pendant. It belonged to my biological grandmother. When she passed away, her will explicitly stated that the necklace was to be left to me. But on the exact day of the funeral, my mother Brenda looked me right in the eye and told me the house had been burglarized. She claimed the necklace was stolen. She even filed a fake police report to make it look convincing. I was devastated for years over that loss. I stared at the paused image of my sister smiling as Andre clasped my stolen inheritance around her neck. "My mother gave it to her," I said, the puzzle pieces clicking together to form a horrifying picture. "My parents have spent my entire life taking from me to give to Vanessa. They literally stole my inheritance to make sure their precious golden child had the best jewelry to flaunt at her elite country club events." Connor looked at me, a new dark understanding passing between us. We were both victims of a deeply rooted toxic family system. My parents, Calvin and Brenda, prioritized appearances and wealth over basic human decency. They paraded Vanessa around like a trophy because she was the beautiful, outgoing social media star who had secured the bag by marrying into white generational wealth. Vanessa was not just a cheating wife. She was a master manipulator, entirely shielded by parents who would do anything to maintain their flawless high society facade. Before Connor could say another word, the heavy silence in the kitchen was shattered by the sharp, demanding ring of my cell phone. The caller ID flashed brightly on the marble counter. It was Brenda, my mother. Connor looked at the vibrating phone, then looked up at me. "Answer it," he whispered, his voice dark and hollow. I took a deep, steadying breath. I composed my facial features, even though she could not see me, and pressed the green speaker button. "Hello, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly casual and neutral. "Emily, thank goodness you finally answered." Brenda's voice blared through the speaker. She sounded frantic, but there was that familiar underlying tone of absolute command she always used when speaking to me. "You need to wire $20,000 to my checking account right this instant." I raised an eyebrow, locking eyes with Connor. $20,000. Why on earth do you need that much cash immediately? It is not for me, it is for your sister. Brenda snapped, clearly irritated that I was asking questions instead of blindly obeying her orders. Vanessa is on a very important business trip in Miami. She is shooting luxury vlog content that will elevate her brand to the global level. There was a problem with her production budget, and her bank cards are acting up. Connor is probably being stingy with his family trust fund again. You need to step up and help her. I stared at the phone. The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking. My mother was ordering me to fund my sister's romantic getaway with my own husband. Mom, you want me to pay for Vanessa's trip? I asked, testing the waters to see just how deep this deception went. Do not be difficult, Emily. Brenda sighed loudly, the sound of ice clinking in a glass echoing through the receiver. This is about family loyalty. Vanessa is carrying the weight of our family's reputation in those elite circles. You are just sitting at home doing spreadsheets. Andre is sick upstairs anyway, so you have plenty of time to drive to the bank right now and handle this. Do not be selfish like you were when you refused to give up your wedding venue for her. Be a good sister for once and wire the money. She needs to secure a VIP suite on a yacht tonight to film a sunset campaign. I looked at Connor. His jaw was locked tight. His eyes were burning with a mixture of profound betrayal and absolute fury. He knew the VIP suite she wanted to book was the perfect setting for her affair. He also knew she had just stolen $500,000 from his family. The fact that she was begging her mother to squeeze me for another $20,000 meant she was hiding the stolen trust money somewhere else, likely in offshore accounts, and needed clean cash for immediate untraceable expenses. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper. Do you know exactly who Vanessa is with on that yacht in Miami? There was a split second of hesitation on the line. I heard Brenda take a quick, sharp breath. Of course I know, Brenda replied smoothly, not missing a single beat. She is traveling with her production team. Now stop asking ridiculous questions and send the money. I will text you the routing number. Do not disappoint me, Emily. She hung up before I could say another word. The line went dead. I set the phone down. Connor and I stood in the wreckage of the broken vase. My mother was not just ignorant of the affair. She was actively facilitating it. She had just confirmed that she knew Andre's fake alibi about being sick upstairs. She was treating me like a personal bank to fund my husband's infidelity and her favorite daughter's lavish lifestyle. They think I am just a blind, boring accountant, I said, turning back to my laptop. I pulled up my secure financial dashboard, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. They think they can take everything from me and laugh behind my back. Connor crossed his arms, his posture stiffening. What are you going to do? I smiled, feeling a ruthless, icy power surge through my veins. It is time to show them exactly what a forensic accountant can do. I am going to track every single penny they have ever spent. I am going to find where Vanessa hid your family's $500,000. And then I am going to bleed them entirely dry. I am not sending a single dime to Vanessa. I spoke the words quietly into the receiver, my voice stripped of all emotion. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could hear the faint clinking of ice in my mother's glass. She was likely sitting on her custom patio furniture in Buckhead, sipping a cocktail while demanding I empty my bank account for her favorite child. Emily, do not start this with me today, Brenda snapped. Her tone was sharp and laced with the familiar condescension I had endured my entire life. She needs that money to secure a VIP suite on a yacht for her brand deal. You are sitting at home doing nothing. Do not be selfish. Be a good sister for once and wire the funds. She is already on a yacht, Mom. I gripped the edge of the marble island. Connor stood perfectly still beside me, his chest heaving with silent, suppressed rage as he listened. She is not on a business trip. She is in Miami on Uncle Vernon's boat, and she is not there with a production crew. She is there with my husband. I waited for the gasp. I waited for the shock. I waited for the maternal outrage that any normal mother would feel upon learning that one daughter was destroying the marriage of the other. But the gasp never came. The outrage never materialized. There was only a long, calculated exhale. You are always doing this, Emily. Brenda's voice was eerily calm, dripping with absolute disdain. Always trying to tear your sister down. You have been jealous of her since you were little girls. Jealous of her looks, jealous of her charm, jealous of the circles she moves in. Andre is a successful man who knows how to navigate high society. He is simply mentoring her. He is helping her establish her brand. And you are twisting it into something ugly because you have a suspicious, insecure mind. My own mother. My own mother was protecting the affair. She knew. She absolutely knew what was happening, and she was actively providing cover for them. You need to keep your mouth shut, Brenda commanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, threatening register. Our family has a flawless reputation in Atlanta. We are respected. We are admired. I will not have you running your mouth and slandering your sister over your own paranoid delusions. Connor comes from a powerful family. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it would be if you started a scandal? You will wire that money right now and you will stay quiet. Do not disappoint me, Emily. The line went dead. The sharp beep of the disconnected call echoed in the silent kitchen. I slowly lowered the phone to the counter. Connor stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and profound realization. He finally understood the depths of the toxicity I had grown up in. He saw the exact mechanism that allowed Vanessa to become a monster. She was bred to be one protected by parents who valued a fabricated social image over their own child's soul. They think I am just a quiet little bookkeeper, I said to Connor. I reached out and pulled my laptop toward me. They think I just balance small spreadsheets and pay utility bills. They think they can blindfold me and rob me in the dark. I opened the laptop and woke the screen. My fingers hit the keyboard, moving with a speed and precision born from years of relentless high-stakes corporate auditing. I am not a bookkeeper. I am a forensic accountant. I hunt financial ghosts for a living. I track money that powerful people try to make invisible. And right now, I was turning every weapon in my professional arsenal onto the man I had married. Connor leaned over my shoulder, watching the screen as lines of data began to cascade across the monitor. I bypassed Andre's personal laptop password in less than 30 seconds. He always used our anniversary date. It was a pathetic, ironic security measure for a man currently sleeping with my sister. I linked his personal device data directly to my proprietary auditing software at Apex. Let us see exactly what you are hiding, Andre. I murmured, my eyes scanning the rapid influx of financial data. I pulled up our joint checking and savings accounts first. They looked completely normal. The balances were exactly what they should be. The monthly deposits and withdrawals matched our agreed budget. It was the perfect, boring financial picture of a happy suburban couple. But I knew better. Fraudsters always maintain a pristine front lawn while burying the bodies in the backyard. I ran a deep sweep for hidden accounts tied to his social security number. I initiated a search through alternate banking institutions, utilizing a backdoor tracing program I had developed for corporate embezzlement cases. The loading bar flashed across the screen. 10%, 50%, 90%. A new window popped open. The screen flooded with red text. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the numbers, the sheer scale of the betrayal making my hands tremble over the keys. What is it? Connor asked, his voice tight with anticipation. What did you find? He took out a second mortgage, I whispered, pointing to a massive, glaring liability listed under Andre's name. He took out a second mortgage on this house, our home. He forged my signature on the loan document 6 months ago. He leveraged the roof over my head for $750,000. Connor cursed under his breath. Where did the money go? I did not stop typing. I traced the outbound wire transfers. The funds had not stayed in Andre's secret account for long. He had systematically broken the massive sum into smaller, unflagged deposits, moving them through a labyrinth of dummy LLCs. But money always leaves a trail. Money always leaves a footprint if you know exactly where to look. I tracked the routing numbers, bypassing the domestic shell companies, following the digital breadcrumbs all the way to the Cayman Islands. He funneled the money offshore, I said, my voice turning to ice. I clicked on the final destination account, revealing the beneficiary details. The name on the screen made my blood boil. Vanessa Worthington Trust. He gave it to her. He mortgaged the home, I paid the down payment for the home, I decorated the home I loved, and he funneled $750,000 into an offshore trust fund bearing my sister's name. They were stealing from us to build a secret nest egg for themselves. They were entirely funding their illicit fantasy life with our hard-earned assets. I am going to destroy him, I said. The anger was gone. There was no more rage, no more sorrow. There was only the cold mechanical precision of an executioner. I accessed the administrative portal for the bank that held his primary and secret credit lines. Because I had his security credentials and my own status as a licensed financial investigator, I had the authority to trigger emergency lockdowns. I selected his Platinum American Express. I selected his Visa Black Card. I selected his secret corporate expense account. With a single keystroke, I froze them all. I did not just freeze them. I flagged every single card for severe internal fraud. I locked the accounts down so tight that he would not be able to buy a pack of gum without triggering a massive security review. His plastic was now completely useless. Just as my finger lifted from the enter key, the silence of the kitchen was shattered by a sudden jarring noise. It was my cell phone. I looked down at the screen. The caller ID displayed Andre's smiling face. A photo we had taken on our vacation to Mexico 2 years ago. Connor stared at the phone, his fists clenching at his sides. Is that him? I nodded. I held up a finger, signaling Connor to remain perfectly quiet. I tapped the screen to answer the call and instantly put it on speakerphone, setting the device down on the marble counter between us. Hey, babe, I said, making my voice sound soft, sweet, and entirely oblivious. A loud, agonizing cough echoed through the speaker. It was followed by a wet, struggling wheeze. Emily? Honey. Andre's voice was weak, raspy, and trembling. He sounded like a man clinging to life on a hospital bed. I feel terrible. My fever spiked again. I have been sweating through the sheets for the past 3 hours. Connor's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. We both knew exactly where Andre was. We had just watched the video of him making out with Vanessa. We knew he was standing on a luxury yacht in Miami, bathed in sunshine. Yet here he was, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance of a dying man in our master bedroom. Faintly in the background of the call, I could hear a rhythmic humming noise. He was using a white noise application to simulate the sound of our bedroom air purifier, masking the sounds of the ocean and the yacht engines. Oh no, I cooed into the phone, pouring fake sympathy into every syllable. I am so sorry you are feeling worse, sweetheart. Do you need me to come upstairs and bring you some medicine? I can make you some soup. No. Andre coughed violently into the receiver. Another fake calculated spasm. Do not come upstairs. I do not want to get you sick, Em. This bug is vicious. I just took some heavy cold medicine and I'm going to try to sleep until tomorrow morning. Just leave me be. Do not open the door, okay? If I need anything, I will call you. I just wanted to hear your voice before I passed out. I looked at Connor. His face was a mask of pure disgust. The manipulation, the blatant, effortless lying. It was terrifying how easily Andre could spin this web of deception. Okay, sweetheart, I replied, making my voice sound gentle and compliant. You get some rest. Actually, I locked the master bedroom door from the outside smart panel just to make sure the dog does not push her way in and disturb you. You just sleep. I will keep the house perfectly quiet for you. Thank you, baby. Andre wheezed, his voice dripping with fake gratitude. You are the best wife. I love you. I love you too, I said, and disconnected the call. The moment the screen went black, the facade dropped. Connor and I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the silence of a house that had been built on a foundation of absolute lies. He is truly a monster, Connor whispered, running a hand through his hair. He actually thinks he is upstairs. He thinks you are just sitting down here guarding his empty bedroom. I picked up my laptop again. He is about to find out exactly who he is married to. I opened the master control panel for our smart home system. Andre thought he was so clever, but he never bothered to learn how the home automation actually worked. I revoked his administrative privileges. I deleted his biometric data from the front door locks. I disabled his garage access code. With a few clicks, I completely locked him out of his own life. He could never step foot in this house again. But my work was not finished. The forensic software I had left running in the background was designed to automatically scan for associated liabilities connected to any names linked to the fraudulent offshore trust. It was a net designed to catch all the fish swimming in dirty water. Suddenly, the screen flashed violently. A massive red alert banner dropped down from the top of the monitor, accompanied by a sharp warning chime. Connor jumped. "What is that? What went wrong?" I stared at the blinking red warning, my heart skipping a beat as my eyes scanned the newly decrypted data file. This was not about Andre. This was not about Vanessa's offshore account. The software had pulled a massive active commercial loan file directly from the Georgia State Registry. I clicked the file, expanding the document across the screen. Oh my God. I breathed out the sheer scale of the stupidity, leaving me temporarily speechless. Connor leaned in, his eyes darting across the legal jargon. "Whose name is that?" "Calvin. Your father." I scrolled rapidly through the commercial loan agreement. My hands felt numb. My father, Calvin, the man who constantly belittled my intelligence, the man who treated his Buckhead mansion like a royal palace, had just committed financial suicide. "Vanessa did not just steal from you, Connor." I pointed at the screen, my voice trembling with the weight of the discovery. "She dragged my parents down with her. This is a commercial business loan for Vanessa's new cosmetic company. The bank issued a massive line of credit for inventory and marketing. But Vanessa has no real income. She has no collateral. So my father co-signed the loan." Connor frowned, trying to process the information. "So your dad helped her start a business? That is stupid, but how is it an alert? Look at the collateral section." I highlighted a block of text at the bottom of the contract. He did not just co-sign. He used the family mansion. Calvin leveraged the Buckhead estate as the sole collateral for a high-risk, unsecured commercial loan. And look at the payment history. I opened the attached ledger. The screen showed a long list of missed payments, penalty fees, and default notices. "Vanessa has not made a single payment on this loan in 6 months." I said, the reality of the situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. "She took the bank's money and never paid it back. And because my father put the mansion up as collateral, the bank has the right to seize the property. My parents are sitting in their ivory tower right now, completely oblivious to the fact that Vanessa has legally signed away their home." The drive to my parents' house in Buckhead was suffocatingly silent. Connor kept his hands gripped around the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. I sat in the passenger seat with my laptop resting heavily on my knees. My mind was a whirlwind of numbers and ledgers and routing codes. The financial web Vanessa and Andre had woven was intricate, but my father intertwining his greatest asset into their mess was the ultimate tragedy. Or perhaps the ultimate poetic justice. We pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the estate. My father, Calvin, had purchased this sprawling mansion 10 years ago to cement his status among the Atlanta elite. It was a physical manifestation of his ego. Tall white pillars, perfectly manicured hedges, and a driveway paved with imported stone. To the outside world, it screamed generational wealth and unshakable stability. To me, it was just a house built on unrealistic expectations and suffocating demands. Connor threw the car into park the moment we reached the front steps. He did not wait for me. He threw his door open and marched up to the grand entrance. I followed close behind him, clutching the freshly printed financial dossiers in my hand. The heavy mahogany door was unlocked. We pushed our way into the grand foyer. The house smelled of expensive cedar polish and fresh lilies. We found my father in the formal living room. Calvin was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool. He was meticulously polishing a brand-new set of custom titanium golf clubs. He wore a crisp cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks. He looked every bit the wealthy patriarch he pretended to be. When he heard our footsteps, he turned around. His eyes flicked over Connor with a brief nod of respect, but the moment his gaze landed on me, his expression soured. The familiar look of disappointment washed over his face. "Emily," he said, his voice dripping with immediate disapproval. "What are you doing here in the middle of the day?" And wearing those clothes. I looked down at my simple dark slacks and plain silk blouse. It was professional office wear, but in my father's eyes it was an insult to the family image. You look like a low-level bank teller, Calvin continued, setting down his polishing cloth. I do not understand why you refuse to present yourself properly. You are a married woman. You represent this family. Look at your sister. Vanessa never steps out of her house without looking like $1 million. She understands what it means to carry the Worthington name with elegance. You could learn a thing or two from her about keeping a husband interested. The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow. He was praising the elegance of a woman who is currently parading around on a yacht funded by stolen money. He was praising a woman who was actively destroying the marriage of the man standing right next to me. Connor let out a sharp bark of laughter. It was a harsh, humorless sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Elegance. Connor said, his voice shaking with raw fury. You think your daughter has elegance, Calvin? You think she is carrying my family name with pride? My father frowned, clearly taken aback by Connor's hostile tone. Connor, what is going on here? Is there a problem between you and Vanessa? Connor did not answer with words. He snatched the thick stack of financial documents from my hands and slammed them down onto the pristine glass coffee table. The loud smack made my father jump. Your elegant daughter is a thief and a gold digger, Connor shouted. He pointed a trembling finger at the papers. She just drained $500,000 from my family trust account. She wired it to an offshore shell company, and right now, at this exact second, she is not on a business trip. She is in Miami. She is sleeping with your other daughter's husband. The room fell completely still. The silence was absolute. I watched my father's face closely. I expected shock. I expected horror. I expected him to drop to the floor in shame, realizing that his golden child was a criminal and a homewrecker. I expected him to turn to me and apologize for constantly comparing me to a monster. But Calvin did not look horrified. He slowly picked up the bank statements. He read the routing numbers. He saw the undeniable proof of the stolen $500,000. He saw the GPS tracking logs proving Vanessa was in Miami with Andre. He placed the papers back on the glass table with careful, deliberate movements. He did not look at Connor. He turned slowly and looked directly at me. His hand flew through the air before I could even register the movement. The slap cracked across my face with the force of a whip. The impact threw my head to the side. My vision blurred into a swirl of bright lights. The sharp sting of pain radiated from my cheek down to my jaw. I tasted the immediate metallic tang of blood in my mouth. He slapped me. My own father slapped me. Not the cheating husband, not the thieving sister, he slapped me. Hey! Connor lunged forward, grabbing my father's shoulder and shoving him backward. What the hell is wrong with you? Your other daughter is the one stealing and cheating. Calvin shook Connor off, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a trembling finger right at my face. This is your fault, Calvin roared, his voice booming through the massive house. Look at you, Emily. Look at how cold and dry you are. You care more about your boring spreadsheets and your quiet little life than you do about being a real wife. You drove him to her. I stood frozen, the blood trickling slowly down my chin. I could not believe the words coming out of his mouth. You drove him to her, he repeated, spit flying from his lips. Andre is a man who needs passion and glamour. He needs a woman who knows how to treat him like a king. You gave him nothing but neglect. You forced that poor man to seek comfort elsewhere. And Vanessa has always had too big of a heart. She was just trying to comfort him. She was trying to save your failing marriage. My jaw dropped. The level of delusion was staggering. He was actually spinning an affair into an act of charity on Vanessa's part. He was blaming me for my husband's infidelity because I did not wear enough designer labels. She stole $500,000 from my family, Connor yelled, stepping between me and my father. She is a criminal, Calvin. Do you hear me? I am going to the police. I am going to have her arrested for grand larceny. I will ruin her. I will ruin this entire family. Calvin drew himself up to his full height. He puffed out his chest, completely unfazed by the threat of law enforcement. He looked at Connor with absolute contempt. "You will do no such thing," Calvin stated coldly. "You are just embarrassed because your wife outsmarted your stuffy old money family. You think you can come into my house and threaten my blood. We are a powerful family, Connor. We have resources you cannot even begin to understand. I have built an empire here." He gestured broadly around the lavish living room, pointing to the expensive art and the custom furniture. "This house is our fortress," Calvin declared, his ego inflating with every word. "I have equity. I have connections. If you try to drag Vanessa's name through the mud, I will unleash every lawyer in Atlanta on you. I will bury you in litigation until your family goes bankrupt. You do not touch my daughter. We will protect Vanessa with everything we have. We are untouchable." I listened to his grand speech. I listened to him boast about his untouchable wealth. I listened to him pledge his entire empire to protect a woman who had already sold him out. I reached up and slowly wiped the drop of blood from my lip. I looked at the crimson smear on my thumb. The pain in my cheek was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating numbness. Every last ounce of daughterly affection I had ever held for this man vanished in that single moment. He had drawn the battle lines. He had chosen his side, and he had chosen to go to war against the only person in the room who actually held all the cards. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not cry. I smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile that made Connor take a slight step back. My father stopped his ranting, his eyes narrowing as he took in my calm, chilling expression. "You think this house is your fortress, Dad?" I asked softly. Calvin scoffed, adjusting his cashmere sweater. "It is my castle, and you are no longer welcome in it. Get out of my house, Emily. You are a disgrace to this family." I reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked the screen. I opened my secure messaging application that connected directly to the executive suite of Apex, my auditing firm. My father thought he was standing on solid ground. He thought his wealth was an impenetrable shield. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already crumbled to dust hours ago. I typed a single highly encrypted message to my lead asset manager. "Initiate acquisition of the Buckhead property debt. Bypass standard review. Authorize immediate transfer of funds. Move to foreclosure status instantly." I hit send. The message vanished into the digital ether. In a matter of seconds, my company would purchase the defaulted commercial loan that Calvin had foolishly guaranteed. In a matter of seconds, I would become the sole owner of his massive, insurmountable debt. He had pledged this house to protect Vanessa, and now I held the deed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I looked at my father, taking in his arrogant posture and his furious eyes. He had no idea that he was a king standing in a castle made of sand. "Let us go, Connor," I said, turning my back on my father. "We are done here." Connor looked confused, but he followed my lead. We walked toward the grand foyer. "That is right, run away," Calvin shouted after us, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "You are weak, Emily. You have always been weak. You will never win against us." I paused with my hand on the heavy brass doorknob. I did not look back at him. I just stared straight ahead at the long driveway and the heavy iron gates. "Enjoy the house, Dad," I said quietly into the empty air. "You will not have it for much longer." I opened the door and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The heat of the Georgia day washed over me, but I felt completely frozen inside. The forensic accountant had taken over. There was no more sister. There was no more daughter. There was only the ledger, and the ledger demanded absolute balance. We got back into Connor's car. He gripped the steering wheel, his breathing heavy as he tried to process the sheer insanity of what had just happened. He looked over at me, seeing the dried blood on my chin. "I cannot believe he did that," Connor whispered, shaking his head. "I cannot believe he blamed you. He is going to protect her. He is going to use his money to fight us, Emily. We need a lawyer. We need to freeze their accounts." I opened my laptop again. The screen glowed, reflecting in the windows of the car. "We do not need a lawyer, Connor," I said, typing a new sequence of commands into my system. "My father does not have any money to fight us. He used this entire estate as collateral for Vanessa's fake business loan, and she defaulted on it 6 months ago. Connor's jaw dropped. What are you saying? I am saying that I just bought his debt, I replied, my fingers flying across the keys. I own the mortgage to that house now, but we are not going to tell him that yet. We are going to let him keep thinking he is untouchable. We are going to let him dig his grave a little deeper. I pulled up the flight schedules for the private airstrip located just outside the city limits. The Worthington family maintained a fleet of private jets there. We needed to get to Florida. We needed to catch them in the act. We needed to strip away every single layer of their deception in front of the largest audience possible. Call your pilot, I instructed Connor, pointing to the screen. Tell him to prep the jet for an immediate departure. Where are we going? Connor asked, pulling his phone from his pocket. We are going to Miami, I said, feeling the ruthless anticipation building in my chest. We are going to crash a yacht party, and we are going to burn their entire world down to the waterline. Connor dialed the number. The engine of the car roared to life. As we sped away from the Buckhead mansion, I looked back at the sprawling estate one last time. My father was probably still standing in the living room, feeling victorious and powerful. He had slapped me to put me in my place. He had demanded I bow to the golden child. He thought he had won the war with a single strike. He did not realize he had just handed me the match to light the fuse. The destruction of my toxic family had officially begun, and I was going to ensure that not a single one of them escaped the blast radius. Every dollar they stole, every lie they told, every drop of blood they spilled, they were going to pay for it with absolute devastating interest. The flight to Miami was going to be the calm before the storm. I stared at my laptop screen, tracking Vanessa's location as her blinking red dot remained stationary at the luxury marina. They were drinking champagne. They were laughing. They were celebrating their successful theft. I closed the laptop, a dark, terrible peace settling over my mind. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Because the bill was coming due, and I was going to collect it in full. The Worthington family private jet was a masterclass in understated wealth. The interior was lined with cream-colored leather and dark mahogany wood. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, leaving the Atlanta skyline far behind us, Connor paced the narrow aisle. He held a glass of bourbon in his right hand, the ice clinking softly against the crystal. He had completely abandoned his usual polished country club demeanor. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mix of exhaustion and pure adrenaline. I sat in one of the oversized captain chairs with my laptop secured on the fold-out table in front of me. The cabin was whisper quiet, but my mind was deafeningly loud. I was pulling every financial record, every text message log, and every offshore routing number I could find. Connor, I said, keeping my voice steady and measured. Sit down. Pacing will not make the jet fly any faster. We need to make sure our timelines perfectly align before we step foot on that yacht. Connor dropped heavily into the seat across from me. He took a long swallow of his bourbon. My family's legal team is already drafting the embezzlement charges. My father called the bank the moment we got to the airstrip. They are locking down the remaining funds in the joint trust, but Vanessa already moved $500,000. The lawyers said, because we are legally married, she might try to claim it was a permitted withdrawal for a joint business venture. She is going to lie, Emily. She is going to spin this. I shook my head, my fingers continuing to fly across the keyboard. She cannot spin a web when I have already cut the silk. I tracked the routing numbers while we were in the car. She did not move the money into a joint venture. She wired it directly into a private offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. The trust is registered exclusively under her maiden name. There is no joint business. It is textbook wire fraud and grand larceny. Connor leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. And what about your husband? What did you find on Andre? Andre is a dead man walking, I replied coldly. I froze his personal checking accounts, his savings, and his corporate expense cards. But the real nail in his coffin is the second mortgage. He forged my signature on a notarized loan document. He committed mortgage fraud to pull equity out of our house, and he funneled that money into Vanessa's offshore account. He crossed state lines and international borders with stolen funds. The Federal Bureau of Investigation takes wire fraud very seriously. We are not just bringing divorce papers to Miami Connor, we are bringing federal indictments. Connor stared at me. For the first time since he kicked down my front door, I saw a glimmer of genuine awe in his eyes. My entire family had always treated me like a boring background character. They thought my job was tedious and unimportant. Connor was finally seeing the lethal precision of a forensic accountant. I did not need to scream or break things to destroy someone. I could dismantle their entire life with a few keystrokes. "What about your father?" Connor asked, his voice dropping lower. "Calvin threatened to bury my family in court. He said his house was a fortress." I smiled, but there was zero warmth in the expression. My father is a fool who signed away his kingdom to finance Vanessa's delusions. He co-signed a massive commercial loan for her fake cosmetic company, using the Buckhead mansion as collateral. Vanessa defaulted on that loan 6 months ago. My auditing firm Apex just purchased that bad debt directly from the bank. I own the mortgage to the Buckhead mansion. My parents are currently sitting in a house that belongs to me. They have absolutely no money to fight you or your family. They are completely bankrupt. Connor let out a long breath, leaning back against the leather headrest. "You planned all of this in the span of 3 hours. I did not plan their crimes," I corrected him. "I am simply shining a light on the evidence they were too arrogant to hide." The flight attendant emerged from the galley, offering us a tray of catered food, but neither of us had the stomach for it. We spent the remainder of the short flight going over the exact sequence of events. We were not just going to confront them. We were going to humiliate them. They had built their entire identities on the perception of wealth and status. Stripping them of their money was the first step. Stripping them of their dignity in front of their wealthy peers was the execution. When the jet touched down at the private terminal in Miami, the thick, humid air of southern Florida hit us immediately. A black luxury town car was waiting on the tarmac to take us directly to the marina. Uncle Vernon had texted me the exact slip number where his super yacht was docked. He knew we were coming. He had promised to keep them entirely occupied until we arrived. During the drive, I opened my garment bag. I had instructed Connor to stop at my house for exactly 5 minutes before we headed to the airport. I needed to change. I refused to confront my cheating husband and my deceitful sister looking like the tired office worker they believed me to be. I slipped into the back of the spacious SUV and changed into the evening gown I had packed. It was a stunning form-fitting emerald green dress that pulled elegantly at my ankles. The silk fabric clung to my curves, radiating power and absolute confidence. I let my hair down from its usual tight bun, allowing it to fall over my shoulders in thick, dark waves. I applied a bold crimson lipstick. When I stepped out of the car at the marina, Connor actually blinked in surprise. The boring accountant was gone. I looked like a woman who owned the world. The Miami marina was a dazzling display of excessive wealth. Massive white yachts bobbed gently in the dark water, illuminated by underwater LED lights. Palm trees swayed in the warm ocean breeze. The sound of upbeat music and clinking glass drifted through the salty air. Uncle Vernon's yacht was impossible to miss. It was a magnificent multi-level vessel that dwarfed the boats around it. The name of the ship was painted in bold gold lettering across the stern. We walked up the wooden dock, our footsteps echoing against the planks. As we approached the boarding ramp, I could hear the sharp, shrill sound of a very familiar voice. It was Vanessa. She was yelling. Connor and I paused at the base of the ramp, concealed by the shadows of a large palm tree. We looked up at the open-air VIP bar situated on the lower deck of the yacht. The area was crowded with wealthy vacationers, sipping expensive cocktails under strings of warm fairy lights. In the very center of the crowd, standing at the glowing onyx bar, was my sister. Vanessa was wearing a skin-tight designer dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She was waving her hands frantically in the air, her face contorted in an ugly mask of pure entitlement. Standing right beside her was Andre. He looked incredibly pale, sweating profusely through his expensive linen shirt. He was holding a sleek leather wallet, frantically pulling out credit card after credit card and handing them to the bartender. "I'm telling you, the machine must be broken!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cutting through the ambient music and drawing the disgusted stares of the wealthy patrons around her. "Run it again. There is absolutely no way that card is declined. Do you have any idea who I am? I am a premium tier lifestyle influencer. I have over 1 million followers on social media. I could ruin this entire cruise line with a single post." The bartender, a tall, stoic man in a crisp white uniform, did not even blink. He swiped another one of Andre's cards through the terminal. The machine emitted a loud negative beep. The screen flashed a bright red declined message for everyone to see. "I apologize, ma'am," the bartender said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. "But every single card this gentleman has provided has been declined by the issuing bank. The fraud alert code specifically states the accounts have been frozen. I cannot serve you any more champagne until the current balance is settled. Your tab is currently at $4,000. Andre wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking visibly. "There has to be a mistake," Andre stammered, looking around at the judgmental faces of the surrounding crowd. "My bank must have put a travel hold on the accounts because I am out of state. Just give me a moment to call customer service." "You have been calling customer service for 20 minutes, sir," the bartender replied dryly, "and your bank is not answering. I will need another form of payment immediately, or I will have to call port security to escort you off the vessel." Vanessa slammed her hands down on the bar, causing the empty cocktail glasses to rattle. "This is completely unacceptable," she screamed, her perfect high society facade completely crumbling into desperate trashy behavior. "Andre, give him your corporate card. Give him the black card. We are not going to stand here and be humiliated by some minimum wage drink pourer." "I gave him the corporate card," Vanessa, Andre hissed through his teeth, his panic escalating into genuine terror. "It declined too. They all declined. I do not understand what is happening." Connor looked at me in the shadows, a grim, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "You really froze everything," he whispered. "He does not have a single dime to his name. Not a single dime," I confirmed, my voice smooth and cold. "Let us go put them out of their misery." I stepped out of the shadows and placed my foot on the boarding ramp. I walked up the metal incline with my head held high, my emerald gown catching the ambient light of the marina. Connor walked a few paces behind me, acting as my silent, formidable shadow. The crowd on the lower deck parted naturally as I approached. People always move when they sense absolute authority. The clicking of my heels against the teak wood deck drew the attention of the bartender. He looked up from the declined credit card machine. Then Vanessa turned around. The color drained from my sister's face so fast she looked like a ghost. Her jaw dropped open, her eyes bulging as she took in my appearance. She had expected the plain, boring Emily in her sensible slacks. She was not prepared for the woman standing before her. Andre froze. He turned his head slowly, as if moving through thick mud. When his eyes locked onto mine, the sheer terror that washed over his features was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. He literally took a step backward, bumping into the bar stool. "Emily," Andre choked out, his voice barely a squeak. "What? How are you?" I did not look at him. I did not acknowledge my sister. I walked straight up to the onyx bar, ignoring them entirely. I opened my designer clutch and pulled out a solid titanium card. It was a specialized corporate asset card issued directly from Apex, with a limit that exceeded the gross domestic product of a small island nation. I placed the heavy metal card onto the bar with a sharp, definitive click. "Put their $4,000 tab on my account," I told the bartender, my voice carrying clearly over the silence of the crowd. "In fact, put the tab of every single person standing at this bar on my account. I am hosting tonight. These two individuals clearly cannot afford to be in a VIP section." The bartender's eyes widened slightly, but he recognized true wealth when he saw it. He took the titanium card and ran it through the machine. It approved instantly with a cheerful chime. A murmur of impressed whispers rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Vanessa stood completely paralyzed. Her humiliation was absolute. She had just spent 20 minutes screaming about her imaginary wealth and status, only to be publicly bailed out by the sister she constantly belittled. I had just turned her into a beggar on the spot, and everyone on the yacht had witnessed it. Andre went into immediate frantic survival mode. His brain scrambled to find a way out of the trap. He forced a wide, sweaty smile onto his face and practically lunged toward me with his arms wide open. "Emily, baby." Andre shouted, his voice painfully loud and fake. "Surprise! You ruined the surprise." "Happy early anniversary, my love. I brought Vanessa down here to help me plan the ultimate yacht party for you. We were going to fly you down tomorrow morning. I cannot believe you found out and came early." He reached out to grab my waist, to pull me into a hug and sell his pathetic illusion to the crowd. I stepped gracefully to the side, dodging his grasping hands. Andre stumbled forward, slightly losing his balance. As I moved out of the way, the space behind me opened up. Connor stepped fully into the light. Vanessa let out a small, strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her stiletto heel catching on the deck. She gripped the edge of the bar to stop herself from falling. "Connor," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. "Hello, Vanessa." Connor said, his tone deadly quiet. "How is your business trip going? Did you manage to secure that sponsorship deal with my $500,000? Andre looked from me to Connor, the fake smile melting off his face. His eyes darted wildly toward the exit ramp, calculating his chances of making a run for it. The pathetic illusion was completely shattered. There was no surprise anniversary party. There was no business trip. There were only two thieves caught in a cage of their own making. "Emily, please," Andre stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Listen to me. It is not what it looks like. We were just having a drink. Nothing happened between us. I swear to you on my life, Emily, nothing happened. We just got down here. It was completely innocent." "Nothing happened," a deep, booming voice echoed from above us. Everyone on the lower deck looked up. Heavy, steady footsteps rang out against the metal spiral staircase leading down from the private observation deck. Uncle Vernon descended the stairs, his posture rigid with authority. He was wearing a crisp navy suit, his face set in a scowl of pure disgust. Uncle Vernon reached the bottom of the stairs and walked directly toward Andre. He was holding a thick manila folder in his left hand. He stopped right next to the glowing onyx bar, his presence commanding absolute silence from the entire crowd. "You have the audacity to stand on my ship and lie to my niece, Uncle Vernon," growled, his voice vibrating with anger. "You think you can come onto my property, drink my liquor, and treat my family like fools?" "Vernon, I promise." Andre begged, his voice cracking. "We just got here today. We never—" Uncle Vernon did not let him finish the sentence. He raised the manila folder and slammed it down onto the glass bar top with incredible force. The flap of the folder burst open. Dozens of glossy, high-resolution 8x10 photographs spilled out, sliding across the smooth surface for everyone to see. I looked down at the images. They were crystal clear, captured by the high-end security cameras Uncle Vernon had installed across the upper decks of his yacht. The photographs showed Andre and Vanessa completely intertwined on the plush white sunbeds. They were half undressed, kissing passionately, their hands roaming all over each other in the moonlight. The timestamp printed in the corner of every single photograph proved they had been hooking up on the deck exactly 12 hours ago. It was irrefutable, undeniable proof of their affair. Uncle Vernon looked at Andre, his eyes narrowing with a dangerous, predatory glint. "You see, boy," Uncle Vernon said, his voice cutting through the humid Miami air like a blade. "The problem with sneaking onto a millionaire's yacht is that we can afford much better cameras than you can." The glossy photographs lay scattered across the smooth glass surface of the bar. The image of my husband and my sister tangled together under the Miami moonlight was burned into my retinas. The silence on the lower deck of the super yacht was absolute. The wealthy patrons who had been whispering and drinking just moments before were now completely speechless, their eyes wide as they stared at the undeniable proof of the ultimate betrayal. Andre looked like a man who had just been handed his own death warrant. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The fake smile he had plastered on his face only seconds ago had completely melted away, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked from Uncle Vernon to me, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw a breath in the humid Florida air. "I told you I was not playing games," Uncle Vernon said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying authority. "You come onto my vessel, you drink my liquor, you disrespect my niece. You are nothing but a common rat in a designer suit." Vanessa was trembling. She stared down at the photographs of herself, her hands gripping the edge of the onyx bars so tightly that her knuckles were completely white. She could not speak. The influencer who always had a snappy comeback, the golden child who could talk her way out of any consequence, was finally trapped in a corner with no escape. Before Andre could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed on the wooden boarding ramp. I turned my head slightly, watching as the crowd parted once again. Connor stood up straighter beside me. His parents had arrived. Arthur and Eleanor Worthington did not walk. They glided. They were the epitome of Southern old money. Arthur wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, his face set in a stony, expressionless mask. Eleanor walked beside him in a simple but impossibly expensive cream dress, her posture rigid, her eyes locked dead ahead. They did not look at the crowd. They did not look at the glittering marina. They walked straight toward the bar with the synchronized precision of executioners. Vanessa saw them approaching and let out a small, terrified whimper. "Arthur," she stammered, taking a clumsy step forward. "Eleanor, please let me explain." Eleanor Worthington stopped 3 feet away from my sister. She slowly looked Vanessa up and down, her gaze taking in the skin-tight designer dress and the messy, panic-stricken face. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her disgust was loud enough to deafen the entire yacht. "Do not speak to me," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with absolute frost. "You are a parasite. We welcomed you into our home. We gave you our name. And you repay us by creeping around like a thief in the night." Arthur stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with his son Connor. He looked at Vanessa with eyes so cold they could have frozen the ocean. "We have spoken with the family attorneys," Arthur stated, his tone strictly business. "As of 20 minutes ago, all of your privileges regarding the Worthington estate have been completely revoked. You no longer have access to the family accounts. You no longer have access to the properties. You are entirely cut off. Furthermore, our legal team has officially drafted embezzlement charges. We are filing grand larceny and wire fraud indictments with the federal authorities first thing tomorrow morning. You stole $500,000 from this family, Vanessa. You will be going to federal prison." Vanessa let out a loud, theatrical sob. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. She was preparing to launch into her victim routine, but before she could utter a single word of defense, a loud, chaotic commotion erupted at the base of the boarding ramp. "Get out of my way!" A familiar shrill voice echoed across the deck. "Do you know who I am? Move aside right now." I closed my eyes for a brief second, bracing myself for the ultimate nightmare. I knew that voice. My mother Brenda shoved her way through the crowd of wealthy patrons, swinging her expensive leather handbag like a weapon to clear a path. My father Calvin followed closely behind her, his face flushed with heat and exertion. They had made it to Miami. Vanessa had used the stolen trust fund money to purchase them first-class tickets earlier that day, ensuring her ultimate protectors would arrive to shield her from the fallout. Brenda stormed onto the deck, her eyes scanning the scene until she spotted Vanessa crying at the bar. She completely ignored me. She ignored the photographs of the affair scattered across the glass. She marched straight up to the Worthingtons and shoved herself between them and her precious golden child. "Leave my daughter alone!" Brenda screamed, pointing a manicured finger directly at Eleanor Worthington. "You arrogant, elitist bullies! You have never accepted her. You have looked down your noses at our family since the day Connor proposed. You think because you have old money, you can stand here and terrorize my child." Eleanor did not flinch. She simply looked at my mother like she was a stain on the floor. "Your daughter is a thief and an adulterer," Eleanor replied calmly. "She stole $500,000 from my son." Calvin stepped forward, puffing out his chest as he tried to physically intimidate Arthur. "She did not steal anything," my father barked, his voice booming over the music. My daughter is a brilliant entrepreneur. She comes from a powerful family. We have more resources than you can fathom. If you try to press charges against her, I will use every dollar I have to bury your family in court. You are not going to lay a finger on her. I stood in my emerald gown watching my parents blindly defend a woman who had just signed away their entire future. It was a staggering display of delusion. They were so desperate to protect the image of their perfect, glamorous daughter that they were willing to go to war with a dynasty completely unaware that their own empire had already been reduced to ashes. Vanessa peeked out from behind my mother. Seeing that her parents had arrived to absorb the blow, her crying shifted from terrified sobs to calculated victimized weeping. She wiped a tear from her cheek, making sure she looked sufficiently broken and fragile. "I did not steal the money," Vanessa cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured innocence. "I borrowed it. I just needed a bridge loan. My cosmetic company was ready to launch globally. I have thousands of units of inventory sitting in a shipping port right now. I needed the capital to clear customs and secure the international marketing rights. I was going to pay Connor back every single penny next week." She pointed a shaking finger at Connor, playing her role to perfection. "Connor is so controlling with money," she sobbed loudly. "He never supports my dreams. He never wanted me to be successful on my own. I had to do it this way to prove I could be a self-made woman. And Andre was just comforting me. He is a tech executive. He understands business. He was just listening to me cry because I was so stressed about the company launch." My mother wrapped her arms around Vanessa, glaring at everyone. "You see," Brenda yelled, "she is a businesswoman trying to build an empire. And you are all standing here accusing her of crimes because you are threatened by a strong, independent black woman." The sheer audacity of the lie was almost impressive. Vanessa had just framed grand larceny as female empowerment. She had framed sleeping with my husband as a corporate networking session, and my parents were swallowing every single word of it without hesitation. I looked at Connor. He was shaking his head, his face pale with disgust. Uncle Vernon crossed his massive arms over his chest, waiting to see how I would handle the circus that had just invaded his ship. I walked slowly toward the bar. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. The crowd watched in breathless silence as I stepped past my father and approached the yacht's main entertainment console located right behind the Onyx bar. Uncle Vernon spared no expense when outfitting this vessel. The yacht featured a massive high-definition media screen that spanned the entire back wall of the lower deck, usually reserved for displaying underwater camera feeds or watching sports during parties. I pulled a small, sleek adapter cable from my designer clutch. I had anticipated needing visual aids for this exact moment. "What are you doing, Emily?" Calvin demanded, his voice laced with venom. "Have you not caused enough trouble today? Have you not embarrassed this family enough?" I ignored him. I plugged the cable into my laptop and connected it directly to the yacht's central media server. I typed my security credentials into the keyboard, syncing my forensic software with the massive display screen above the bar. "You claim you borrowed that money for your cosmetic company, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the deck. "You claim you have inventory sitting at a port. You claim you were going to pay Connor back." Vanessa lifted her chin, emboldened by the physical presence of my parents. "Yes," she said defiantly. "It is a legitimate business." I smiled. I pressed the enter key. The massive screen above the bar flashed brilliantly to life. The bright light illuminated the shocked faces of the crowd. I did not show them a bank statement. I showed them a federal court docket. The screen displayed an official, heavily stamped legal document from the United States Bankruptcy Court. In the center of the document, highlighted in bright yellow, was the name of the company of Vanessa, Worthington Cosmetics, LLC. "Let us look at your legitimate business," I said, my voice projecting with the cold, undeniable authority of a lead investigator. I pulled the corporate filings directly from the state registry. "Worthington Cosmetics has never manufactured a single product. You do not have inventory at a port. You do not have international marketing rights. In fact, you do not even have a warehouse." I clicked the next button. The screen transitioned to a satellite image of the registered business address for the company. It was not a factory. It was a dilapidated, abandoned strip mall sitting in an empty parking lot. Your company is a shell corporation, I announced to the crowd. It is a dummy entity created for the sole purpose of moving dirty money. You registered a fake business so you could apply for massive commercial lines of credit. And you used that credit to fund your private jet flights, your designer clothes, and your luxury vacations. My father stepped forward, his face turning an angry shade of purple. That is a lie, Calvin shouted. She is building a brand. You are doctoring those documents because you are jealous. I tapped another key. The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a highly detailed forensic financial ledger. It showed the exact flow of the $500,000 Vanessa had stolen from the trust account of Connor. I am a forensic accountant, Dad, I said, looking right into his furious eyes. I track money for a living. I can see every single digital fingerprint she left behind. The money she stole from Connor did not go to a cosmetic supplier. It went into a dark offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But that is not even the worst part. I looked back at the screen, my heart beating with the cold mechanical rhythm of absolute justice. I pulled up the final document, the master file that would bring my father's entire world crashing down around his ears. Because the stolen trust money was not enough to fund her lifestyle, I continued, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. She needed more. So she took out a commercial business loan for her fake cosmetic company. A loan for $1.2 million. Brenda looked at Vanessa, her expression faltering for the very first time. Vanessa, what is she talking about? Brenda whispered. Vanessa did not answer. She was staring at the massive screen, her eyes wide with absolute paralyzing terror. She knew exactly what I was about to show them. The bank required collateral for a loan that large, I said, addressing the crowd but keeping my eyes locked on my father. Vanessa did not have assets, so she convinced someone to co-sign the loan for her. She convinced someone to guarantee the debt using their own property. I hit the final key. The screen expanded to show the original signed commercial loan agreement. Right there at the bottom of the page was my father's signature, and listed under the collateral section was the exact address of the Buckhead mansion. Calvin stared at the screen. The color completely vanished from his face. His mouth dropped open, his eyes scanning the digital document in absolute horror. Vanessa defaulted on that loan 6 months ago, I stated, delivering the final fatal blow. She never made a single payment. The bank declared the debt toxic. They moved to seize the collateral. They moved to foreclose on the Buckhead estate. Calvin gripped his chest, staggering backward as the reality of my words struck him. No, he gasped, shaking his head wildly. No, that is impossible. The bank never called me. I never received a notice. Because Vanessa changed the contact address on the loan file, I explained coldly. She routed all the default notices to an empty post office box, so you would never know she was letting the bank take your home. She let you stand there and defend her, knowing she had already sold the roof over your head to pay for her champagne. Brenda let out a shrill, piercing scream. She turned and grabbed Vanessa by the shoulders, shaking her violently. Tell me she is lying! Brenda shrieked, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. Tell me you did not mortgage our house, Vanessa. Tell me you did not lose our home. Vanessa just stood there, crying pathetic, silent tears. She had no more lies left to tell. The forensic data on the screen was absolute. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, desperate pleading. Emily, he begged, his voice cracking with panic. Emily, you have to help us. You work in finance. You have to call the bank. We can set up a payment plan. We can fix this. You have to stop them from foreclosing. I stood in my emerald gown, looking down at the man who had slapped me just hours ago. The man who had called me a failure. The man who had blamed me for my husband's affair. I reached out and gently closed my laptop. The massive screen above the bar went completely black, plunging the deck back into the ambient glow of the fairy lights. I cannot call the bank, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly steady, and entirely devoid of mercy. Why not? Calvin cried out, tears welling in his eyes. Why cannot you call them? Because the bank does not own the debt anymore, I replied. I do. My firm bought the defaulted loan 3 hours ago. I hold the mortgage to the Buckhead mansion. and I am evicting you first thing tomorrow morning." The words hung in the humid Miami air, heavy and absolute. My father collapsed onto a nearby lounge chair, his face buried in his trembling hands. The invincible patriarch of the Worthington family was finally broken, crushed under the weight of his own arrogance and his blind devotion to a daughter who had just destroyed his entire empire. Brenda stood completely frozen, her eyes darting between me and the massive digital screen displaying their financial ruin. There was no more screaming. There were no more insults. They had nothing left to fight with. I turned my attention away from my parents and locked my eyes onto Andre. My soon-to-be ex-husband was pressing himself against the onyx bar, looking like a trapped animal. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Andre," I said, my voice echoing across the silent deck. "You thought because I worked quietly in an office that I was blind to what you were doing. You took out a second mortgage on our home. You forged my signature. But that was just a local crime. That was just the beginning of your stupidity." I tapped a key on my laptop. The screen shifted to display a complex web of routing numbers, international bank codes, and wire transfer logs. "I am a forensic accountant." I continued pacing slowly toward him. "I track international financial fraud for a living. You did not just steal equity from our house. You wired $750,000 across state lines and international borders into a shell account in the Cayman Islands. You used domestic servers to execute fraudulent international transfers. That is textbook federal wire fraud. It carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. And I have already sent every single byte of this data to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." Andre began to hyperventilate. He grabbed his chest, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it made his knees buckle. He looked at Vanessa, desperately seeking an ally, seeking the woman he had risked his entire life for. But there is no loyalty among thieves. Vanessa realized the walls were closing in. She saw the undeniable proof on the screen. She saw the reality of federal prison looming over them. The instinct for self-preservation kicked in instantly. She took a sharp step away from Andre, her face twisting into a mask of sudden manufactured panic. "It was him!" Vanessa shrieked, pointing an accusing finger directly at Andre. "I did not know anything about wire fraud. He is the tech executive. He knows how to move money. He forced me to do it. He told me if I did not sign the documents for the offshore account, he would expose our affair to Connor. He blackmailed me. He forged the signatures. I am a victim here." The absolute betrayal hit Andre like a physical shockwave. He stared at Vanessa, his mouth hanging open as he processed the fact that she was throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. The panic in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, murderous rage. "You lying snake!" Andre roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying fury. "I lost everything for you. I gave you everything. Before anyone could react, Andre lunged forward. He closed the distance between them in a split second, his hands shooting out and wrapping violently around the throat of Vanessa. He drove her backward, slamming her against the edge of the glass bar. Vanessa gasped, her hands flying up to claw frantically at his arms, her designer heels slipping on the teak wood deck. The crowd of wealthy patrons erupted in screams, scrambling backward to get out of the way of the sudden violence. Connor surged forward to intervene, but Uncle Vernon was faster. The older man did not even flinch at the violence erupting on his ship. He simply raised his hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod. Out of the shadows of the lower deck, 4 massive security guards in identical black suits materialized. They moved with terrifying military precision. 2 of them tackled Andre from behind, breaking his grip on the throat of Vanessa and slamming him face first onto the hardwood deck. The sickening thud of his jaw hitting the floor echoed over the screams of the crowd. They pinned his arms behind his back, securing him instantly. Vanessa collapsed onto the deck, coughing and gasping for air, her hands clutching her bruised neck. As Andre struggled helplessly against the guards, the distant piercing wail of police sirens pierced the night air. The red and blue flashing lights cut through the darkness of the marina, reflecting off the hulls of the surrounding superyachts. The authorities had arrived. I did not call the local police, I said calmly, looking down at Andre as he writhed on the deck. I bypassed the local authorities completely. Heavy boots thundered up the wooden boarding ramp. A team of 6 agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their backs swarmed the lower deck. The crowd parted instantly, falling into stunned silence as the federal agents took control of the scene. The lead agent, a tall woman with a serious, uncompromising expression, walked directly past Andre. She did not even look at him as her officers pulled him to his feet and slapped heavy steel cuffs onto his wrists. Instead, she walked straight over to where Vanessa was sitting on the floor, gasping for breath and shivering in her ruined designer dress. Vanessa Worthington, the lead agent, announced, her voice carrying absolute federal authority. "We are not just here for him. I am serving you with a federal subpoena. You are being detained for questioning regarding international money laundering conspiracy to commit wire fraud and grand larceny. Get on your feet. You are coming with us." The federal agent grabbed Vanessa by the arm, pulling her roughly to her feet with no regard for her expensive designer dress. Vanessa shrieked loudly and tried to violently pull her arm away, her face stained with ruined makeup and dark mascara streaks. She stumbled backward in her high heels, looking desperately toward our parents. Her eyes were wide and pleading as the cold steel handcuffs clicked securely around her delicate wrists. Andre watched the entire scene from the floor, his face pressed against the teak wood deck by the heavy boots of the yacht security guards. His jaw was bruising rapidly and his eyes were completely vacant, staring blankly at the polished wood. The federal agents moved with clinical military precision, ignoring the loud gasps and panicked murmurs of the wealthy patrons who had backed away to give them plenty of space. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers parked on the dock reflected off the polished glass of the bar, painting the entire scene in harsh alternating colors. Calvin could not comprehend what was happening in front of him. His perfect golden child was being treated like a common street criminal. He stepped directly into the path of the federal agents, puffing out his chest and turning his face an angry shade of purple. He demanded they unhand his daughter immediately. He tried to use his loud, booming executive voice to intimidate the authorities. The lead agent did not even blink at his display of faux power. She looked at my father with absolute crushing boredom and informed him that interfering with a federal arrest would result in him leaving the yacht in handcuffs as well. She advised him to step aside and let them do their job or face immediate obstruction charges. Calvin backed down slightly, but his explosive anger needed an immediate outlet. Since he could not control the federal agents or stop the arrest of his favorite daughter, he turned his entire focus onto me. He pointed a trembling manicured finger right at my face, crossing the distance between us. He called me a traitor and a vicious, jealous woman. He told the silent crowd that I was making a massive mistake and that I had orchestrated this entire circus simply because my husband preferred my beautiful sister. He roared that he had millions of dollars at his disposal sitting in elite banking institutions. He swore he would hire the most ruthless and expensive defense attorneys in all of Atlanta to tear my case to shreds. He promised that Vanessa would not spend a single night in a jail cell and that she would be completely exonerated of all charges. He took another step toward me, his eyes burning with pure, unhinged hatred. He said he would drain his entire massive fortune to destroy my life, my career, and my pathetic little auditing firm. He looked me dead in the eye and stated with absolute venom that as of this moment I was no longer his daughter. He publicly disowned me, shouting that I was a bitter failure who was permanently dead to the Worthington family. I let him scream until his throat was raw. I let his harsh, cruel words hang in the humid Miami air. The wealthy patrons on the observation deck were completely silent, watching the patriarch of the Worthington family lose his mind in front of high society. When he finally ran out of breath and stood there panting, I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear over being publicly disowned by a man I despised. The little girl who used to desperately crave his approval had died the moment he slapped me in his lavish living room. I simply turned my head and gave a slight, deliberate nod to the woman standing quietly near the boarding ramp. My executive assistant, Sarah, had flown down on the private jet with Connor and me. She had been waiting patiently in the shadows, holding a sleek silver titanium briefcase. At my signal, Sarah stepped forward. The sharp click of her heels against the deck drew the attention of everyone in the crowd. She walked straight up to the onyx bar, gliding right past my furious father without giving him a single glance. She placed the heavy briefcase on the glass surface and snapped open the metallic latches with a loud crack. She turned the open briefcase toward me and took a respectful step back, blending into the background. I reached inside and pulled out a single thick stack of official legal documents. On the very top of the stack was a certified watermarked certificate of debt ownership bearing the state seal of Georgia. I picked it up and dropped it onto the bar right next to the high-resolution photographs of my cheating husband and my deceitful sister. I looked at Calvin and told him to look very closely at the name of the purchasing entity printed on the top line of the contract. Calvin sneered in disgust, but he leaned forward to read the document. His eyes traced the bold black lettering that identified Apex Financial as the sole owner of his massive commercial liability. He frowned in deep confusion, trying to understand why my boutique auditing firm was listed on a state financial registry as a primary lien holder. I broke down the financial trail in front of everyone, making sure my voice carried to the back of the deck. I wanted the entire crowd to hear exactly how foolish this man truly was. I explained how Vanessa had fabricated Worthington Cosmetics out of thin air to secure a $1.2 million commercial business loan. I detailed how she used the bank funds to finance her luxury influencer lifestyle, buying designer bags and booking private jets, instead of building an actual corporate entity. I explained that because she had no real assets or verifiable business income, she needed a wealthy guarantor to sign the paperwork. She needed someone arrogant and foolish enough to leverage their own home to secure her dirty money. She needed someone who trusted her blindly and ignored basic financial logic. My father stood completely frozen, listening to me dismantle his carefully constructed empire piece by piece. I explained that the issuing bank had classified the loan as highly toxic debt because Vanessa had not made a single payment in 6 full months. They were desperate to offload the liability before it further damaged their quarterly portfolio and triggered a federal audit. So my firm bought the debt for pennies on the dollar. I looked at Calvin and told him that he was not just in simple default. He was exactly 90 days past due on the accelerated repayment terms outlined in the fine print. I told him that my aggressive legal team had filed the final administrative paperwork this morning while he was busy polishing his new custom titanium golf clubs in his massive living room. The Atlanta Municipal Court officially processed the foreclosure at exactly 9 in the morning. I announced my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. The local sheriff department is currently standing at the Buckhead estate. They have already changed the locks on your heavy mahogany doors. They have deactivated your security gate codes and seized the luxury vehicles in your garage. Your impenetrable fortress is gone. I watched the exact moment the realization crushed his spirit. His arrogant posture completely evaporated, leaving him looking small and hollow. His shoulders slumped deeply and his mouth fell open in silent, terrifying horror as he realized I held the deed to his life. "You do not have millions of dollars to hire defense attorneys," I continued, relentlessly refusing to give him a moment to breathe. "You do not have a sprawling estate to borrow equity against. Your personal and business bank accounts are currently being frozen by court order to satisfy the outstanding penalties and legal fees associated with the sudden foreclosure. You cannot afford to bail Vanessa out of federal custody. You cannot even afford to book a cheap hotel room in Miami tonight. You and my mother are currently legally and entirely homeless." The silence that followed my declaration was heavy and suffocating. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the ocean against the massive hull of the yacht and the distant wail of the police sirens fading into the city. Calvin's knees completely gave out. He grabbed the edge of the glass bar to keep himself from collapsing onto the wooden deck. He could not speak a single word. The booming, confident voice that had mercilessly belittled me for 30 years was completely gone, replaced by ragged, shallow breathing and soft whimpers of defeat. Then my mother finally reacted. Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp and half agonizing wail. The brutal reality of losing her mansion, her elite country club status, and her vast, unearned wealth hit her much harder than the reality of her daughter going to federal prison. She realized in a split second that she had absolutely nothing left. She had pushed all her chips onto Vanessa, and Vanessa had lost everything at the table. The glamorous high society life she had clung to was over forever. Brenda stumbled forward, her designer shoes slipping dangerously on the deck. She fell hard to her knees right in front of me, ignoring the stares of the wealthy crowd. She reached out and grabbed the emerald silk fabric of my evening gown, clenching it in her fists. Tears streamed heavily down her face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark, ugly streaks across her pale cheeks. She began to sob uncontrollably, creating a pathetic and desperate spectacle. She begged me for mercy, holding on to my legs. She cried that I could not do this to my own flesh and blood. She pleaded with me to reverse the foreclosure, to call off my lawyers, and give them their beautiful home back. When I did not respond to her begging, she switched tactics, instantly playing the ultimate victim card she had perfected over decades. She looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes and said that I owed her this favor. She claimed she had sacrificed everything for my well-being when I was a child. She sobbed that she had saved every single penny for my future during the hardest, most grueling years of her life. She cried out that she had given up her own personal dreams to build a massive college inheritance for me, a secret fund that she supposedly sacrificed her youth to maintain just so I could have a good life and a proper education. She begged me to remember that college inheritance and show her some grace in her moment of absolute ruin. I looked down at my mother, sobbing at my feet, clutching my dress like a desperate beggar on the street. I felt absolutely nothing for her. There was no pity and no sorrow left in my heart for these toxic people. Before I could even tell her to let go of my dress, Uncle Vernon stepped forward from the edge of the bar. He stood towering over my kneeling mother, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He let out a cold, booming laugh that echoed across the quiet marina, making several people flinch in surprise. He shook his head slowly, looking down at Brenda with deep, immeasurable contempt. He told Brenda that her pathetic, manipulative lies were finally at an end. Uncle Vernon turned his dark gaze toward me. He looked me straight in the eyes, and his stern expression softened just a fraction. He took a deep, heavy breath and said it was time I knew the real devastating truth about that college inheritance. Uncle Vernon looked down at my mother sobbing at my feet, and his face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. The humid Miami night seemed to grow entirely still as his deep voice boomed across the deck of the superyacht. He told Brenda that her pathetic, manipulative lies were finally at an end, and that he was going to expose the darkest secret she had buried decades ago. My mother froze her hands, slowly releasing the emerald silk of my gown. She looked up at Uncle Vernon with wide, terrified eyes, shaking her head frantically as if she could stop the words from leaving his mouth. Vernon turned his dark gaze toward the silent crowd of onlookers, making sure every single wealthy patron heard the absolute truth about the great Calvin and Brenda empire. He explained that 20 years ago, my biological grandmother, a brilliant and formidable woman, had passed away. She was a woman who saw right through the greedy, shallow facade of my mother. My grandmother knew exactly what kind of toxic environment I was being raised in, and she wanted to guarantee my future. Vernon announced to the stunned deck that my grandmother did not leave a single dime to Brenda or Calvin. She left her entire massive fortune in a locked trust fund meant exclusively for me. I was the sole legal heir to a multi-million-dollar estate designed to protect me from the very people who were supposed to love me. My father staggered backward, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He tried to open his mouth to shut Vernon down, but he was completely paralyzed by the exposure of his ultimate crime. Vernon continued, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. He revealed that Brenda and Calvin had intercepted the legal notices when I was just a child. They hired a crooked notary and forged my grandmother's signatures, manipulating the guardianship laws to gain total control over the trust fund of a minor. He looked directly at Vanessa, who was sitting on the deck surrounded by federal agents, and told her the sickening truth about her perfect life. Every single luxury car she drove, every designer dress she wore, every elite private school tuition, and every lavish vacation was paid for with blood money stolen directly from her sister. Calvin had used the stolen millions as the seed money to build his entire manufacturing business. The great self-made man was nothing but a common thief who had financially cannibalized his own child to feed his ego and spoil his golden daughter. "That is a lie!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. She scrambled backward on the teak wood deck, pointing a trembling finger at Vernon. "You are making this up because you have always been jealous of us. There was no trust fund. We built this family from nothing. Do not listen to him." Uncle Vernon did not even blink at her frantic denial. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation as he pulled out a thick, worn, leather-bound ledger. He tossed it onto the glowing onyx bar right next to the federal foreclosure documents and the photographs of the affair. The heavy book landed with a definitive thud. "That is the original estate ledger," Vernon stated, his tone dropping to a lethal calm. "Along with the original bank transfer receipts, the forged signature affidavits, and the hidden account numbers from 20 years ago. My private investigators dug it out of a secure vault last week. The statute of limitations on civil disputes might be tricky, but stealing a multi-million-dollar inheritance from a minor beneficiary is a severe federal offense." Brenda stared at the leather book as if it were a venomous snake. The last remaining shred of her arrogant high society persona completely evaporated. She curled in on herself, sobbing hysterically, realizing that her entire life was built on a criminal lie that was now sitting in plain sight for the whole world to see. I looked at the worn ledger on the bar, and the absolute depth of their betrayal washed over me. But instead of breaking my heart, it hardened my resolve into impenetrable steel. They had not just emotionally abused me for my entire life. They had systematically robbed me of my legacy to fund their delusions. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the deck. I looked down at Calvin and Brenda and told them their tears were entirely wasted on me. I explained that I had already authorized my legal team to take immediate and devastating action the moment Vernon had shown me the evidence yesterday morning. "I did not just buy the bad debt on your mansion," I said, looking directly into the terrified eyes of my father. "I filed an emergency asset freeze against your entire financial portfolio. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly how to track hidden funds. My lawyers submitted the ledger and the evidence of your trust fund theft to the Federal Banking Commission hours ago. They have officially frozen your retirement accounts, your hidden offshore safety nets, and your precious stock portfolios to restitute the funds you stole from me." Calvin let out a choked, agonizing gasp, clutching his chest as the reality of his total annihilation set in. "You do not just owe me the original principal of the trust fund," I continued, relentlessly refusing to give them a single moment to breathe. "You owe me 20 years of compound interest. You owe me damages for federal fraud. The courts will drain every single penny you have ever hidden away to pay me back. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable lives working minimum wage jobs just to pay off a fraction of what you stole from your own daughter. You are completely and utterly finished." The crowd remained entirely silent, captivated by the absolute destruction of the family. The federal agents who had been dealing with Vanessa finally turned their full attention to Andre. He was still pinned to the hardwood deck, his face bruised and bleeding from where the yacht's security team had slammed him down. The lead agent, a tall woman with a serious, uncompromising expression, grabbed the back of his expensive linen shirt and hauled him roughly to his feet. Andre let out a pathetic whimpering sound, his eyes darting frantically around the deck until they landed on me. He struggled against the heavy steel handcuffs biting into his wrists. He begged me to help him. He swore that Vanessa had manipulated him into the mortgage fraud and that he had only wired the money across state lines because he was confused and stressed. He cried that he loved me and that he was entirely innocent. I did not even blink. I looked at the man who had betrayed my marriage and stolen my equity, and I told him to save his pathetic breath for the federal judge. The agents did not give him another second to speak. They jerked his arms, dragging him forcefully down the wooden boarding ramp. The harsh red and blue lights of the police cruisers parked on the dock illuminated his terrified, tear-streaked face. The heavy boots of the agents thundered against the wood as they shoved Andre into the back of a squad car. The heavy door slammed shut, echoing across the marina and trapping him inside his new, terrifying reality. Vanessa was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by federal agents holding her subpoena. She looked completely shattered, her flawless influencer image destroyed beyond repair. She was shivering uncontrollably, her eyes wide and vacant as she stared at the flashing police lights. Connor stepped forward, his posture rigid and commanding. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He pulled out the official divorce papers that his family attorneys had drafted at lightning speed that afternoon. He did not say a single word to her. He simply pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from his pocket and signed his name on the bottom line with aggressive, sharp strokes, using the glass surface of the bar as a table. When he was finished, Connor looked down at the woman he had once planned to spend his life with. There was no sadness in his eyes, only a profound, cold relief. He threw the heavy stack of signed divorce papers directly at her face. The pages scattered across her lap and fluttered onto the wet deck surrounding her like white confetti. "You are nothing to me," Connor said, his voice cutting through the humid night air with absolute zero warmth. "Have fun in federal prison, Vanessa. Do not ever try to contact my family again." Before Vanessa could even formulate a response, a low, rhythmic thudding sound began to echo across the marina. The dark water around the yacht began to ripple and churn violently as a massive, sleek, black helicopter bearing the Worthington family crest descended slowly from the night sky. The powerful wind from the rotors whipped across the deck, knocking over empty champagne glasses and sending napkins flying into the air. The helicopter hovered over the private helipad at the end of the dock, its landing lights illuminating the surrounding water. Arthur and Eleanor Worthington turned without another word, walking away from the garbage they had just discarded. They moved with their usual regal grace, entirely unbothered by the chaos they were leaving behind. Connor paused for a brief second and looked at me. He gave me a deep, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the absolute victory we had achieved together. We had burned their lies to the ground and emerged completely victorious. He turned and followed his parents down the ramp, leaving my sister sobbing hysterically on the floor as the federal agents moved in to pull her to her feet. I stood on the deck of the magnificent super yacht, looking down at the ruined remnants of the people who had tried to break me for my entire life. My mother was kneeling on the floor, weeping over her lost status. My father was leaning against the bar, completely broken and homeless. My husband was locked in the back of a police cruiser, and my sister was being marched down the ramp to face federal indictments. They had nothing left. No money, no mansion, no freedom, and absolutely no dignity. Uncle Vernon stepped up beside me, placing a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. I looked up at him and smiled for the first time all night. I turned my back on my former family, feeling the warm, salty ocean breeze against my face. I stepped out of their dark, toxic shadows and walked toward the bow of the ship, ready to step into the brilliant light of my own magnificent future. "Your grandmother knew exactly what kind of monster she raised," Uncle Vernon said, his voice echoing across the silent deck. "She knew Brenda was driven by nothing but greed and status. When your grandmother passed away 20 years ago, she did not leave a single penny to your mother. She established a multi-million-dollar trust fund, and she named you as the sole exclusive beneficiary. That money was meant to guarantee your future, Emily. It was meant to protect you from them." Brenda let out a horrible gasping sound. She scrambled backward on the deck, her eyes wide with panic. "That is a lie," Brenda shrieked, her voice breaking. "We built our wealth from nothing. There was no trust fund. Do not listen to him." Uncle Vernon did not even blink. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a worn leather-bound book. He threw it onto the glass bar. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the federal foreclosure documents. "That is the original estate ledger," Vernon stated coldly. "My private investigators recovered it from a secure vault. It contains the original bank transfer receipts, the forged signature affidavits, and the hidden account numbers. Brenda and Calvin intercepted the legal notices when you were a child, Emily. They hired a crooked notary and forged the documents to gain total control over your trust fund. Every single luxury car they drove, every designer dress Vanessa wore, and the initial capital Calvin used to start his business, all of it was paid for, with blood money stolen directly from you. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit the deck like a physical shockwave. They had not just emotionally abused me my entire life. They had literally stolen my future to finance their delusions of grandeur. I stepped forward, looking down at my parents. I did not shed a single tear. "You do not just owe me the principal balance," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You owe me 20 years of compound interest and damages for federal fraud. My legal team submitted this ledger to the Federal Banking Commission hours ago. Your retirement accounts, your hidden offshore safety nets, and your precious stock portfolios have all been completely frozen by court order to restitute the funds you stole from me. You have absolutely nothing left." The absolute finality of my words shattered whatever fragile alliance existed within that toxic family. The realization that they were entirely bankrupt and facing federal charges stripped away their high society masks. They turned into wild animals backed into a corner. Calvin slowly turned his head to look at Vanessa. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He realized that Vanessa had not only squandered his stolen wealth, but had actively tricked him into signing away his home. He lunged forward and brought his heavy hand across her face with a loud, sickening crack. The slap echoed across the marina. "You stupid, arrogant girl!" Calvin roared, standing over her as she collapsed onto the wooden planks, holding her cheek. "You told me that cosmetic company was going to make us billions. You told me mortgaging the Buckhead estate was just a temporary formality. You ruined me. You destroyed my entire life for your pathetic vanity." Vanessa screamed, clutching her face. She looked up at him with eyes full of venom and immediately turned her wrath onto our mother. "Do not blame me," Vanessa shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Brenda. "She is the one who taught me to be this way. She taught me that money and status were the only things that mattered. She encouraged me to act like a gold digger. She told me to drain Connor of his wealth and use Andre to get whatever I wanted. This is her fault. She raised me to be a parasite." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically stabbed. "How dare you!" Brenda cried out, her voice shrill and hysterical. "I sacrificed everything to give you a glamorous life. I stole for you, I lied for you, and this is how you repay me." They screamed at each other, their ugly true natures exposed for the entire world to witness. The wealthy patrons on the observation deck watched in absolute disgust. The glamorous family had been reduced to a pack of rabid dogs tearing each other apart on the floor of a yacht. Uncle Vernon raised his hand and gave a sharp nod to the security team standing nearby. The four massive men in black suits stepped forward. They did not ask politely. They moved with clinical precision. "This vessel is private property," Uncle Vernon announced, his voice booming over their arguments. "And you are standing here wearing assets purchased with stolen funds. Strip them." The security personnel descended upon Brenda and Vanessa. The women shrieked and fought, but they were entirely powerless. The guards systematically removed the heavy diamond necklaces, the solid gold bracelets, and the designer watches from their wrists. They confiscated the custom leather handbags that Brenda had been clinging to. Every single item of luxury that had been bought with my stolen trust fund was stripped away, leaving them looking small, pathetic, and entirely ordinary. "No," Brenda wailed, reaching out for her confiscated jewelry. "Please, those are mine. You cannot take them. They were never yours," I stated coldly, watching the guards place the items into a secure lockbox. "You are just returning stolen property." Vanessa realized that her parents could not save her. She realized her beauty and her tears had absolutely no power over the federal agents or the security team. She crawled across the deck, her ruined designer dress soaking up the spilled drinks and condensation. She dragged herself to my feet and threw her arms around my legs, clinging to me with desperate, terrifying strength. "Emily." "Please," Vanessa sobbed, her face buried against my knees. "Please forgive me. I am your sister. We share the same blood. You cannot let them send me to federal prison. You cannot leave me with nothing. I am sorry for everything. I will do whatever you want. Please, just help me." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me since childhood. The woman who had stolen my husband, stolen my money, and mocked my very existence. I felt the weight of her hands on my legs, and I felt absolutely zero pity. I reached down and grabbed her wrists. I did not do it gently. I dug my fingers into her skin and violently shoved her away from me. Vanessa tumbled backwards, sprawling across the deck in a pathetic heap. Blood loyalty does not apply to parasites, I said, my voice completely empty of any emotion. You have spent your entire life feeding off my pain and my hard work. You are a thief and a coward, Vanessa. And now you are going to pay the bill. I did not look at her again. I did not look at Calvin, who was arguing with the local police officers arriving on the dock. I did not look at Brenda, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her empty hands. I turned my back on the entire toxic nightmare. Uncle Vernon offered me his arm. I took it, stepping proudly and confidently over the scattered remnants of their shattered lives. We walked down the boarding ramp together, the cool night air feeling incredibly clean and refreshing against my skin. We left them there, on the brightly lit deck, screaming and crying and tearing each other apart, while the federal agents and police officers began writing up their official arrest reports. 6 weeks later, the federal trial officially began in Atlanta. The heavy oak doors of the grand federal courthouse swung open, revealing a massive room filled with polished mahogany and stern, unyielding faces. I sat in the front row, right behind the prosecution table, wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit that fit me perfectly. Uncle Vernon sat right beside me, radiating a calm and powerful energy that seemed to command respect from everyone in the room. Across the wide center aisle, sitting in the very back row of the gallery, were Calvin and Brenda. They were entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant high society couple who used to host lavish charity galas and sneer at anyone they deemed beneath them. Brenda was wearing a faded beige dress that looked like it had been pulled from a discount bin at a dusty thrift store. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now completely gray and frizzy, hanging limply around her pale, sunken face. She did not have a single piece of jewelry on her body because every diamond and pearl had been seized to pay back the trust fund she stole from me. Calvin sat hunched over next to her, wearing a wrinkled brown suit that was at least 3 sizes too big for his rapidly shrinking frame. His expensive manicures and confident, powerful posture were entirely gone. They had been replaced by dirt packed under his fingernails and a desperate, terrified twitch in his left eye. They were currently living in a rundown, roach-infested motel on the very edge of the city suburbs. Their entire fortune had been frozen and seized by the federal government, pending the investigation into my stolen inheritance. They had absolutely no money for room service or private chefs, and had been surviving on cheap canned soup and whatever stale bread they could buy with the few dollars they had managed to hide from the feds. The scent of stale motel air and cheap laundry detergent seemed to cling to their wrinkled clothes. The other people in the gallery deliberately left an empty space around them, refusing to sit anywhere near the disgraced and ruined couple. The heavy wooden door next to the judge's bench opened, and the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Everyone stood as the federal judge took his seat, looking down at the room with absolute authority. The first major shock of the day came when Andre was led into the courtroom by 2 armed marshals. He was wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit with his wrists and ankles shackled in heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against the polished floor. He did not look at me or Vanessa as he slowly took the witness stand. Andre had realized very quickly that he was facing decades behind bars, and his expensive lawyers had convinced him that his only chance at survival was to completely turn on my sister. He had struck a massive plea deal with the federal prosecutors just days before the trial began. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Andre agreed to expose every single dirty detail of Vanessa and her complex money laundering ring. He sat on the wooden witness stand, taking a sip of water from a small paper cup before he started to sing like a canary. He told the silent courtroom exactly how Vanessa had masterminded the entire fraudulent operation from the very beginning. He explained how she had used her fake glamorous influencer status to create dummy corporations and shell companies designed specifically to hide stolen funds. Andre detailed the exact conversation where Vanessa had plotted to trick Calvin into signing the fraudulent mortgage documents by batting her eyelashes and playing the role of the helpless, perfect daughter who just needed a little startup capital. He revealed the offshore accounts she had opened using fake names and the massive illegal wire transfers she had initiated to steal vast amounts of money from the Worthington family business. He cried pathetic crocodile tears on the stand, claiming that Vanessa had manipulated his love and blinded him with her breathtaking beauty. He swore to the jury that he was just a confused pawn in her wicked game and that she had forced him to sign the wire transfers. Vanessa sat at the defense table, practically vibrating with unhinged rage, as she listened to the man she had manipulated completely destroy her life. Because Calvin and Brenda were completely broke and all her illicit funds had been seized, Vanessa had absolutely no money to hire a private defense attorney. She had initially been assigned a public defender, but her massive ego could not handle someone telling her what to do or advising her to take a plea deal. She had fired the poor, exhausted lawyer on the very first day of trial and arrogantly informed the judge that she would be representing herself. She truly believed that her pretty face and her manipulative charm would be enough to win over a federal jury and clear her name. She stood up to cross-examine Andre, wearing an ill-fitting gray pantsuit provided by the court because all her designer clothes had been confiscated. Without her professional makeup teams and expensive hair extensions, she looked incredibly plain and entirely exhausted. Vanessa paced back and forth in front of the witness box, trying to act like a dramatic, brilliant lawyer she had seen on television. She pointed a shaking finger at Andre and demanded that he admit he was lying because he was obsessed with her. She asked ridiculous leading questions that made absolutely no legal sense and badgered the witness with emotional outbursts. The federal prosecutor stood up every 10 seconds to object to her formatting, and the judge sustained every single one. Vanessa stomped her foot like a spoiled toddler throwing a temper tantrum in a toy store. She whined to the judge that the prosecutor was being mean to her and not letting her tell her side of the story. The stern, silver-haired judge looked down at her with absolute withering contempt. He sharply reminded her that a federal courtroom was not a reality television show and ordered her to stop wasting the court's time with her theatrical nonsense. The members of the jury tried to maintain serious expressions, but several of them were openly covering their mouths to hide their laughter. Vanessa had completely transformed herself from a high society princess into an absolute laughingstock. She finally gave up her disastrous line of questioning and stormed back to the defense table, burying her face in her hands. With her pathetic defense completely dismantled, it did not take long for the trial to conclude. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning to the courtroom with their final decision. The foreman stood up and read a guilty verdict for every single charge on the massive federal indictment. Vanessa collapsed back into her wooden chair, letting out a loud, piercing shriek that echoed off the high ceiling. The judge slammed his wooden gavel, demanding silence before he proceeded immediately to the sentencing phase. He looked down at Andre first, his face carved from stone. He told Andre that his cooperation with the federal government was the only reason he was not spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. But the judge made it perfectly clear that Andre was still a cowardly, opportunistic criminal who had betrayed his wife and stolen from a powerful family just to line his own pockets. He sentenced Andre to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. Andre slumped forward, burying his face in his chained hands and sobbing loudly as the harsh reality of his ruined life finally crushed him. Then the judge turned his cold, piercing gaze toward Vanessa. He told her that he had presided over this court for 30 years and had rarely seen a defendant with such a profound lack of remorse or basic human decency. He called her a manipulative parasite who had destroyed her own family and attempted to defraud honest business owners simply to fund her pathetic vanity and shallow lifestyle. The judge sentenced Vanessa to 5 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for financial fraud and money laundering. But the punishment did not stop there. He ordered that Vanessa would be legally responsible for paying full and complete financial restitution to the Worthington family for every single dollar she had stolen and squandered. Since she had absolutely no assets left, the judge declared that her future wages would be garnished for the rest of her life. She would leave prison as a penniless convicted felon, burdened by a massive, insurmountable mountain of debt that she could never hope to repay. Vanessa let out another agonizing scream. She turned wildly toward the back of the courtroom, looking for her parents. She shrieked for Brenda, begging her mother to do something to stop the guards from taking her away. But Brenda just sat in the back row, shivering in her cheap dress and sobbing quietly into her hands. She did not even look up as the heavy federal bailiffs grabbed Vanessa by the arms and hauled her forcefully out of the courtroom, her cries fading down the hallway. The trial was officially over, and the wicket had finally fallen. I stood up from my seat, smoothing down the pristine fabric of my charcoal suit. I felt an incredible, profound sense of peace wash over my entire body. The heavy, dark cloud that had hovered over my life since childhood had finally dissipated, leaving nothing but clear skies ahead. Uncle Vernon smiled at me and patted my shoulder before we turned and walked out of the courtroom together. We moved through the grand marble hallways, leaving the stench of fear and ruin far behind us. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the brilliant, warm Atlanta sunshine. The bright light felt like a physical blessing on my skin. As I started walking down the wide concrete steps, I saw a shadow detach itself from a large marble pillar near the entrance. It was Calvin. He must have scrambled out of the courtroom before us, desperate to intercept me outside. He stumbled into my path, looking absolutely pathetic and broken. His face was covered in gray, patchy stubble, and he smelled strongly of cheap liquor and unwashed clothes. His hands were trembling violently as he held them out toward me, blocking my way down the stairs. "Emily, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a miserable, high-pitched whine. "Please, you have to help us. We have absolutely nothing to eat tonight. We cannot afford the rent at that awful motel, and they are going to kick us out into the street. Just give me a few dollars, Emily. I am your father. You cannot let me starve in the gutter like a dog." I stopped on the steps and looked at the broken shell of a man who had terrorized me my entire life. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical emptiness. I did not even bother to speak to him. I simply gave a slight, deliberate nod to the two massive private security guards walking just a few steps behind me. The guards moved with terrifying speed. They stepped in front of me and shoved Calvin roughly in the chest, clearing my path. He let out a sharp gasp and stumbled backward, his weak legs tangling beneath him. He fell hard onto the hot concrete steps, scraping his hands and tearing the fabric of his cheap, oversized pants. He lay on the ground looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes, expecting me to reach down and help him up. I just kept walking. My expensive heels clicked in a steady, powerful rhythm against the stone as I walked right past him. I did not look back. A sleek black town car was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. The driver opened the heavy door, and I slid into the cool leather interior. Uncle Vernon got in beside me and closed the door, shutting out the sound of Calvin whimpering on the concrete. I looked out the tinted window and told the driver to head straight to the county registry office. I did not want to miss a single moment of the final chapter. The Buckhead mansion was officially going up for public auction that afternoon. I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors of the Buckhead mansion the very next morning. The sprawling estate was entirely empty because the courts had liquidated every single piece of expensive furniture and every gaudy crystal chandelier to satisfy my parents' massive debts. The house felt like a hollow, echoing tomb. I walked through the massive living room where my father used to belittle my dreams and stood in the grand foyer where my mother used to parade Vanessa around. I felt absolutely no nostalgic attachment to the cold marble floors. I did not buy this massive property to live in it because I had no desire to sleep in the house that had birthed so much trauma and betrayal. I made a single phone call to the best commercial demolition crew in Atlanta and told them to bring their heavy equipment to tear the entire interior down to the foundational studs. I watched with profound satisfaction as the workers smashed through the dark, oppressive wood paneling. They ripped out the snobby country club aesthetics and demolished the walls that had hidden decades of emotional abuse. Over the next several months, I poured millions of dollars into completely transforming the estate into a brilliant open concept masterpiece filled with natural light and vibrant modern energy. I officially established the Harrington Innovation Incubator. It was a massive state-of-the-art startup hub designed exclusively to fund and support abused Black women and girls who wanted to build their own businesses. I wanted to create an impenetrable sanctuary for women who had been marginalized and told they would never amount to anything. We transformed the lavish formal dining room into a collaborative workspace filled with sleek glass desks, and we turned the master bedroom suite into a fully equipped wellness center where women could receive free therapy and emotional support. A year later, the massive facility was finally complete and ready to open its doors. I hosted a spectacular grand opening gala to officially launch the foundation and welcome our very first cohort of brilliant young women. The mansion was completely unrecognizable from the dark, toxic fortress it used to be. The grand driveway was lined with glowing lanterns, and upbeat, empowering music echoed through the warm night air. Hundreds of influential investors and successful entrepreneurs gathered in the main atrium to celebrate. I wore a stunning, bespoke white suit that made me feel incredibly powerful and entirely untouchable as I walked through the joyful crowd, watching the young women in our program pitch their startup ideas. Uncle Vernon stood near the center of the room, acting as a primary board member and looking incredibly proud as he introduced our new entrepreneurs to his extensive network of business contacts. I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder and turned around to see Connor standing behind me. He looked healthier and happier than I had ever seen him because the heavy, exhausting burden of dealing with Vanessa was completely gone from his shoulders. He was wearing a sharp-tailored tuxedo and holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. Connor had eagerly signed on to be one of the primary financial backers for the incubator. He handed me a glass and gave me a warm, genuine smile, telling me that the facility was absolutely breathtaking. We stood together watching a young woman passionately present her software design to a group of venture capitalists. Connor turned to me, his expression growing serious and incredibly sincere. He thanked me from the very bottom of his heart, telling me that my courage and my brilliant forensic accounting had completely saved his life. He admitted that he had been entirely blinded by the fake, glamorous illusion Vanessa had projected, and realized that if I had not exposed the massive financial fraud, he would have been trapped in a miserable, parasitic marriage forever. I clinked my glass against his and told him that we were both finally free to build lives with people who actually valued truth and integrity. As Connor walked away, my attention was drawn to a large, sleek television screen mounted on the wall near the catering station. The screen was muted, but it was playing a local evening news broadcast about the shifting economic landscape in the Atlanta suburbs. The camera panned across the interior of a massive discount grocery store, showing the harsh fluorescent lighting and the scuffed linoleum floors. I froze as the camera briefly focused on a janitor working in the background of the shot. It was Brenda. My mother was wearing a faded, oversized polyester uniform shirt and heavy orthopedic work shoes. She was pushing a dirty yellow mop bucket down the cereal aisle, her shoulders slumped in absolute exhaustion. Her hands, which used to be perfectly manicured and covered in stolen diamonds, were now raw and red from scrubbing floors with harsh industrial chemicals. She looked up at the camera for a brief, agonizing second, her face hollow and etched with deep, permanent misery. She looked completely broken, stripped of all her fake high society pride, and forced to perform grueling manual labor just to survive in her cheap suburban motel. I stared at the screen, watching the woman who had enabled my abuse and stolen my inheritance wipe sweat from her forehead with a dirty rag. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the final heavy lock click into place. The universe had delivered exact and absolute justice. I turned my back on the television screen, completely erasing Brenda from my reality forever. I walked slowly up the floating glass staircase to the second floor of the facility and stepped out onto the massive grand balcony that overlooked the front gardens. This was the exact spot where Calvin used to stand with his expensive cigars, looking down at his party guests with arrogant disdain. Now the space was completely transformed. A beautiful, sleek titanium plaque was mounted on the pristine white wall next to the balcony doors, bearing my name in bold, elegant lettering and dedicating the entire foundation to the power of resilience and truth. Uncle Vernon stepped out onto the balcony behind me holding two elegant crystal flutes filled with expensive vintage champagne. He handed me a glass and we stood side by side looking down at the spectacular gala below. The driveway was filled with laughter and the sound of brilliant women building their futures. Vernon looked at me, his dark eyes shining with immense pride and profound respect. He raised his glass in the warm evening breeze and told me that I had taken the absolute worst betrayal imaginable and turned it into a masterpiece of justice. I clinked my crystal flute against his, listening to the bright ringing sound echo over the balcony. I took a slow sip of the crisp, chilled champagne, feeling the sweet, vibrant energy of total victory singing in my veins. I realized in that perfect, pristine moment that the absolute sweetest revenge was not just destroying the wicked people who had tried to break me. The ultimate revenge was taking the very ashes of their toxic empire and using them to build an unbreakable, beautiful legacy of my own. I looked out over the thriving, magnificent world I had created, and I let out a radiant, powerful smile. The greatest lesson from this journey is that true vindication does not come from simply destroying those who betrayed you. It comes from taking the very ashes of their toxic empire and using them to build an unbreakable, beautiful legacy of your own. When you stop seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving it, you finally free yourself to create a life aligned with your true worth. Your trauma does not define you, but how you rise from it certainly does. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your own story of resilience in the comments below and hit the subscribe button for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations.